Do you remember when dinner was more than just grabbing takeout? When ground beef wasn't just a fast solution, but the heart of dishes that made the whole family rush to the table? Those meals, the ones that could turn a single pound of beef into something unforgettable, have quietly faded from our kitchens. But today, we're reviving those long-lost classics. 25 ground beef recipes that once filled family homes with warmth and stories. These aren't just plates of food, they're pieces of our past, ready to be enjoyed again. Let me share these forgotten kitchen gems with you. Hobo dinner packets. Back in the 1930s, when every cent had to stretch, people came up with smart ways to turn basic ingredients into something memorable. That's when hobo dinner packets found their place on American tables. Imagine this. A well-seasoned ground beef patty nestled in foil alongside carrots, potatoes, and onions. These handy meals got their start by the railroad tracks, where workers needed food they could cook right over open campfires. The foil wasn't just for wrapping. It was the key to turning tougher cuts of beef into tender, flavorful dishes. Those railroad men made a simple but brilliant discovery. When everything cooks together, the vegetables release their juices, making the beef melt in your mouth tender. And here's a little-known trick. They'd add a pat of butter and a pinch of dried thyme before sealing it all up. As the butter melted, it created a rich, savory sauce that was nothing short of perfection. Funny how things work out, isn't it? What began as a meal born from necessity turned into a staple at backyard barbecues and camping trips. Sure, they were simple, but they offered something most modern meals just don't have. That moment when you peel back the foil and a cloud of savory steam rises up, letting you know something delicious is about to hit your plate. Victory Garden Beef Pie. When World War II hit home, those old pioneer lessons about making the most of every ingredient found new purpose in the Victory Garden Beef Pie. This wasn't just a meal. It was a way to support the war effort from your own kitchen. Every backyard garden became a front line in the fight against waste and scarcity. Home cooks combined ground beef with whatever their victory gardens produced. Carrots, peas, potatoes, stretching a single pound of rationed meat into a hearty meal. And the crust, it wasn't made from the usual pastry dough. Instead, they blended in mashed turnips or parsnips, adding extra nutrition and saving precious flour for the troops overseas. The real ingenuity came in how entire neighborhoods worked together. One family planted tomatoes, another grew beans. And when harvest time came around, they shared their bounty. That way, everyone had a variety of vegetables to create these pies. It wasn't just about feeding families. It was about building stronger communities, proving that even in hard times, American kitchens found clever ways to keep spirits high. And while Victory Gardens filled backyards, something else was cooking its way into history. Church supper beef squares. Down in those bustling church basement kitchens, they had pans big enough to feed half the congregation. The women running those kitchens were masters of their craft, layering ground beef, cheese, and their signature sauces to make sure every square turned out just right. They'd mark the casseroles with tiny toothpick flags, lining up perfect grids so each serving was the same size. No one left hungry and no one took more than their share. The real magic happened during baking. They timed it so the rich, savory aroma floated up into the sanctuary just as the service was ending. Some folks swore they could tell exactly who was cooking that day just by the scent in the air. Mrs. Johnson always threw in extra oregano, while Mrs. Miller's secret touch was a hint of celery salt. And when it came to feeding hard-working crowds, nothing changed the game quite like the factory workers' beef roll. These weren't dainty little lunch sandwiches. These were hearty rolls built to keep America's industrial workforce going strong. The dough was tough enough to travel but soft on the inside, thanks to a good mix of eggs and milk that kept it tender even after hours in a lunch pail. Inside, seasoned ground beef was combined with rice and chopped vegetables, then rolled up tight like a jelly roll. The trick was baking them low and slow, forming a sturdy crust that sealed in all that flavor. Factory workers could slice off a piece during their short breaks, knowing the rest would stay fresh for later. Some cooks even hid little surprises inside, a ribbon of cheese or a few pickles tucked through the middle, giving their loved ones something to smile about during those long, exhausting shifts. And as factory whistles slowly gave way to office buzzers, American cooking continued to evolve with the times. That brings us to another forgotten classic, the Swedish potato beef casserole. Long before fancy casseroles became a kitchen trend, Swedish immigrants introduced something truly special to our tables. This wasn't just any dish, it was a masterclass in layering, transforming a small portion of ground beef into a meal that felt downright luxurious. The magic began with paper-thin slices of potato, each one brushed with a silky white sauce that could leave your grandmother swooning. But this wasn't just any cream sauce. It had a hint of nutmeg and a dash of white pepper, age-old secrets carried across the ocean by those first Swedish families who made their home in Minnesota. But what really set it apart was how those potatoes were arranged, each slice slightly overlapping the next, creating a pattern that was as practical as it was beautiful. When the beef mixture settled onto that careful arrangement, something incredible happened in the oven. The juices worked their way down, filling every layer with rich flavor. By the time it hit the table, those little flavor pockets had everyone at the holiday feast asking for the recipe. The harvest time hot dish. Farm wives understood the importance of timing. They'd start with ground beef from their own herds and mix in whatever vegetables were ripe in the garden. The layering was key. A base of potatoes to soak up all those rich juices, followed by seasoned beef, then generous layers of corn, green beans, and tomatoes picked fresh that morning. But the real secret? A layer of cream-style corn hidden right in the middle. As it baked, that corn turned into a creamy sauce that tied everything together perfectly. Each farm had its own version, often shaped by the land itself. Up in Minnesota, wild rice made its way in. Down in Iowa, it was all about that sweet, tender corn. These hot dishes weren't just meals, they were showcases of each farm's finest produce, served proudly when neighbors gathered to help bring in the harvest. While farm kitchens were turning out their seasonal masterpieces, city cooks were crafting their own culinary innovations like the unforgettable corner store curry beef. In America's growing cities, those tiny corner stores became unlikely hubs of flavor. Small family-run groceries brought with them the cooking traditions of lands far away, transforming simple ground beef into something extraordinary. Indian and Pakistani shop owners introduced curious customers to spices they'd never encountered before, freshly ground blends of coriander, cumin, and turmeric. But what made it truly special was how these seasoned cooks adapted age-old recipes to local tastes and whatever ingredients were on hand. They'd simmer ground beef with onions, garlic, and their secret spice mixes until the scent drifted through the entire neighborhood. And the real magic? These shopkeepers didn't keep the recipes to themselves. They taught their loyal customers how to make these dishes right in their own kitchens. They'd carefully portion out spices into small paper bags, scribbling cooking instructions by hand right on the wrapper. Some shop owners even created special blends tailored for different families. Mrs. Anderson preferred hers mild, while the Johnsons always asked for a little extra cardamom. It wasn't just about selling groceries. It was about sharing traditions, one handwritten recipe at a time. Out on the wide-open prairie where one-room schoolhouses stood against the endless sky, the prairie school teacher's casserole became a quiet symbol of care and resilience. Teaching wasn't just about lessons and books out there. It was about enduring the brutal prairie winters and looking after each other. These young teachers, often far from their own families, learned their way around a kitchen from the mothers of their students. Each household would send along a little something, a bit of ground beef, a few potatoes, or whatever vegetables they could spare. The teacher would gather these humble offerings and turn them into a casserole big enough to feed the children during their midday break. The recipe changed with the seasons. In autumn, fresh corn and ripe tomatoes found their way into the dish. When winter settled in, it was hearty root vegetables from the cellar that filled the pot. But the real artistry came with the topping. A simple blend of cornmeal and crushed crackers that baked to a golden, crispy finish in the warmth of the schoolhouse's wood-burning stove. Some teachers became so well known for their casseroles that their recipes were written down in family cookbooks, shared right alongside multiplication tables and grammar lessons. In small-town America, those old general stores were more than just places to buy supplies. They were where community traditions were stirred to life through the famous General Store Beef Supper. Every Saturday night, the back room transformed into the social heart of the town. Store owners knew exactly what each family liked. They started with ground beef from nearby farms, mixing it with rice that had sat patiently on the shelves. But the real secret, a spoonful of finely chopped pickled vegetables went right into the mix. Those tangy pickling juices soaked into the beef, creating rich, complex flavors that left folks wondering how something so simple could taste so extraordinary. The way they prepared it was a tradition in itself, passed down through generations. Everything went into large stone crocks, where the mixture rested for hours while the owners kept busy out front. The gentle warmth from the pot-bellied stove slowly worked its way through the crocks, drawing out every bit of flavor. And by the time the store's doors closed and families gathered in that back room, the humble beef supper had become something truly unforgettable. The boarding house special. In those crowded city boarding houses during America's urban boom, this meal became the stuff of legend. These weren't just meals. They were everyday miracles that kept entire communities fed. In the heart of the boarding houses during America's urban boom, cooks had a special way of working magic with ground beef. They'd blend it with day-old bread soaked in milk, but here's the clever twist. They added a spoonful of leftover coffee from breakfast. That slight bitterness cut through the richness of the meat, giving it a deeper, more satisfying flavor. Every boarding house had its own cherished spice mix, tucked away in a tin above the stove and passed down whenever a new cook took over. Those kitchens ran like clockwork. Somehow, they could stretch a bit of beef to feed 20 people and still make it taste like a meal fit for royalty. The trick was in the layers. First came a bed of potatoes, then the seasoned beef, all topped with a gravy made from the morning's coffee and whatever vegetables were lying around. And when times got lean, they simply added more potatoes. But that rich coffee gravy made sure no one noticed the beef becoming scarce. Then came the unsung heroes of the 1950s, the school cafeteria ladies, feeding an army of growing kids with their famous beef and bean lunches. Long before nutrition labels and calorie charts, these women relied on years of experience and recipes tested on thousands of hungry students. Their magic began before sunrise. They mixed ground beef with navy beans that had soaked overnight, and then added their secret touch, a splash of pickle juice straight from those giant cafeteria pickle jars. This wasn't just about making the beef go further. The beans soaked up every bit of flavor, turning each bite into something hearty and satisfying. These cafeteria legends had timing down to perfection. They knew exactly how long to let that pot simmer so the beans held their shape, but still melted effortlessly with every bite. Seasonings in those days weren't measured with spoons or scales. They were measured in coffee cans and pickle jars. A full pickle jar of salt, half a coffee can of pepper. Nothing fancy, but it worked like a charm every time. Some folks even said you could set your watch by the moment the cooks added the final seasonings, precisely 47 minutes before the first lunch bell rang. Cincinnati-style chili mac. But don't mistake this for your everyday chili. This was something entirely different. Picture ground beef slowly simmered in a sauce that wakes up every corner of your palate. Think cinnamon, a hint of chocolate, and a spice blend that would leave even seasoned chili cooks scratching their heads. This wasn't a happy accident. Greek restaurant owners combined their knowledge of Mediterranean spices with classic American comfort food. The result? A 5-layer masterpiece that had people lining up down the street. It started with a bed of spaghetti, topped with that spiced beef sauce, followed by beans, onions, and a towering heap of finely shredded cheese. And here's a little-known detail. The original version had a splash of red wine vinegar. That tangy note cut through the richness and made those bold spices come alive. Every neighborhood spot had its own closely guarded mix of spices, recipes kept under lock and key like prized treasures. Depression-era meatloaf Wellington. Who says hard times couldn't spark a little culinary brilliance? During the Great Depression, resourceful home cooks reimagined the luxurious beef Wellington and turned it into something truly special. The Depression-era Meatloaf Wellington. This wasn't just about making ends meet, it was about creating a bit of magic with what they had. Instead of pricey cuts of meat, they used seasoned ground beef. But the real stroke of genius was that golden crust wrapped around it. They figured out that a humble mix of flour, water, and whatever fat was on hand could be rolled out paper thin and folded just right to create layers almost as flaky as puff pastry. Baked to a golden finish, it brought a bit of joy to the table and, for a while, made people forget about tough times. And the presentation? That's what really made it shine. Each loaf was brought to the table with a pattern carefully scored into the top. Sometimes a wheat stalk design, sometimes simple crisscrosses. These weren't just for show. They were marks of pride, turning an ordinary Sunday meal into something to celebrate. Beef and cornmeal tamale pie. Down near the southwest border, something magical was happening. This dish combined the heart of Mexican tradition with the practicality of Depression-era cooking. And this wasn't just any casserole, it was pure borderland brilliance. The secret? That unforgettable cornmeal crust. Unlike today's instant versions, those home cooks knew the importance of toasting the cornmeal first, slowly stirring it in a dry pan until the aroma filled the air and drifted through the neighborhood. Then, they'd blend it with hot water, just as their Mexican neighbors had shown them, creating a crust that baked up crisp on the outside and soft within. The filling was simple but packed with flavor. Ground beef seasoned with chilies, garlic, and a dash of cumin, spices that were just starting to appear in American kitchens. And here's where the real ingenuity showed. Whatever the garden had to offer went into that filling, stretching the beef further than you'd think possible. When times were lean, this meal could stretch to feed twice the usual number, and somehow no one left the table hungry. Let's jump ahead to the post-war years when American kitchens were alive with a different kind of ingenuity. Mining town meat pockets. These weren't your average hand pies, they were crafted to keep hardworking miners going through long, grueling hours underground. Miners' wives learned that wrapping seasoned ground beef in a sturdy dough wasn't just practical, it was critical. The crust needed to be tough enough to survive a day stuffed into metal lunch pails, yet tender enough to eat right from the hand. No utensils required. They started adding rye flour to the dough, which gave it strength and a distinct, hearty flavor that became a hallmark of mining town kitchens. The fillings told the story of each family's roots. Polish wives folded in sauerkraut with the beef, Welsh cooks added turnips, and Italian families mixed in peppers and a touch of oregano. But every version had one thing in common: a thick, crimped edge that acted like a built-in handle, keeping dirty, work-worn hands away from the heart of the meal. Out in the farm fields, where the day began before sunrise and didn't end until the last light faded, the farmhand's favorite kept America's agricultural backbone strong. This wasn't just a meal. It was the fuel that powered the hardest working hands in the country. Farm wives knew exactly how to build it right. They started with ground beef from their own herds, mixing in day-old bread soaked in fresh cream. But the real secret: eggs gathered that very morning, whipped until frothy and gently folded into the meat. As it cooked, those eggs caused the mixture to puff up, making the dish feel lighter without sacrificing its stick-to-your-ribs hardiness. Cooking was an art passed down through generations. The mixture was pressed into well-seasoned cast-iron skillets, their surfaces darkened and perfected by decades of use. Each farmhouse had its own way of doing things. Some slow-cooked it on the back of a wood stove, letting the flavors deepen over time. Others gave it a quick sear before finishing it off in the oven. But one step was always the same: brushing the top with melted butter and a dash of strong black coffee, forming a rich, flavorful crust that locked in every bit of juice. While farmhands filled up for another long day in the fields, the church basements back in town were alive with their own cherished traditions. Sunday social beef squares. After church on Sunday afternoons, these gatherings brought something truly special to the table. These weren't just casseroles, they were culinary centerpieces, turning fellowship halls into showcases of skill and pride. The church ladies had perfected a method that today's cooks have all but forgotten. They pressed seasoned ground beef into large square pans, carefully scoring the tops in a diamond pattern. It wasn't just for looks. Those grooves held little pools of savory sauce, ensuring each bite was packed with flavor. And every piece came out perfectly even, a testament to years spent making sure no one at the social left feeling shortchanged. The presentation was a work of art. The beef squares were arranged neatly on oversized platters, with bright rows of pickled vegetables from summer gardens laid between them for a pop of color. But the real magic, it was hidden in the sauce. Each cook had her own take on the recipe, but the foundation was always the same. Pan drippings blended with strong coffee from the church percolator, simmered low and slow until it clung thickly to the back of a spoon. These Sunday socials weren't just about filling plates. They nourished the bonds of the community. Young brides learned the secrets by standing quietly at the edges of those bustling kitchens, peeking over shoulders and catching softly shared advice. How finely to dice the onions, just how many times to score the meat for the perfect finish. Some folks claimed they could tell exactly which family had prepared a dish just by recognizing the pattern carved into the top. Railway station beef turnovers. Back when trains were the lifeline of American travel, rail station kitchens served up something truly unforgettable. Beef turnovers designed to keep passengers satisfied for the long miles ahead. These weren't your everyday hand pies. They were little wonders wrapped in pastry. The crust was something special. So flaky it would crack apart like glass, yet strong enough to hold up through a bumpy journey. The secret? Station cooks folded butter into the dough exactly 13 times, building delicate layers that practically dissolved on the tongue. As for the filling, it was a simple but flavorful mix of seasoned ground beef, finely diced potatoes and onions, chopped small to make sure every bite was packed with taste. Those station cooks knew their timing to the second. They could spot the train's whistle before it even rounded the bend, and by the time it pulled in, those turnovers were hot, wrapped in wax paper, and ready to warm the hands and hearts of tired travelers. Each station had its own signature touch, maybe a sprinkle of sage up in Minnesota, or a dash of paprika down in St. Louis. But when the Great Depression swept across the country, home kitchens had to come up with new ways to make ends meet. That's when Depression stretcher patties began making their way onto tables all across the country. These cooks even had a language all their own. Paint it red meant adding tomato sauce, give it a blanket called for a layer of melted cheese, and make it cry meant piling on the onions. Every diner had its own secret seasoning blend stored in old coffee cans, lids punched with holes to shake just the right amount over that sizzling beef. The ground beef radio dinner. Picture it, it's the 1930s. The radio's playing your favorite evening show, and dinner's sizzling away in a single trusty skillet. But this wasn't just any meal. It was perfectly timed to be ready right alongside the night's entertainment. Families would gather close, plates in hand, listening to their programs while enjoying this clever bit of kitchen planning. The real beauty was in the timing. You'd start browning the beef as soon as Amos and Andy came on, toss in the vegetables when Jack Benny cracked his first joke, and by the time your favorite mystery show reached its final twist, dinner was hot and ready. Every step followed not a clock, but the rhythm of the radio. Meanwhile, just beyond the kitchen window, another forgotten favorite was finding its way onto American tables. Sunday night hash? While the name might sound a bit fancy, this dish was all about practicality. After the big Sunday family meal, resourceful cooks would take the leftover roast beef, grind it up fresh, mix it with yesterday's potatoes, and turn it into something completely new. But the real magic wasn't in the ingredients. It was in the method. They'd gently fold in whipped egg whites, borrowing a trick from the French soufflé, but giving it a no-nonsense American spin. Every household had its own little ritual. Some believed you had to beat the eggs exactly 100 times with a fork, no more, no less. Others kept special copper bowls, passed down through the generations, used only for this task. And when that hash emerged from the oven, puffed up, golden, and proud, you'd never guess it started out as leftovers. It stood tall on the table, making Sunday night feel just as important as the big meal earlier in the day. As American kitchens continued to change, another inventive recipe was quietly making its way onto family tables. The beef and biscuit boarding house stack. In the crowded boarding houses of America's booming cities, where time moved fast and appetites ran high, the beef and biscuit boarding house stack earned its place as a legend. This wasn't just another quick-fix meal. It was a carefully crafted tower of flavors and textures. The brilliance started with the biscuits. Cooks would roll the dough out paper-thin, creating layers so delicate they felt like fine fabric. Between each biscuit went a generous helping of seasoned ground beef. But not just any mixture. They simmered it with finely chopped onions and a splash of leftover morning coffee, a clever trick that gave the meat a depth of flavor far beyond its simple ingredients. But the real magic happened during assembly. These stacks rose 6, sometimes 7 layers high, with each level receiving a ladle of rich gravy that soaked deep into the biscuits. The bottom layers turned soft and almost custard-like, soaking up every bit of flavor, while the top stayed crisp enough to give a satisfying crack under the touch of a fork. Some boarding houses became so renowned for their stacks that businessmen would compete for rooms, all to secure a regular seat at the table and a guaranteed helping of this unforgettable dish, Pioneer Trail Mix meatballs. Those wagon trains heading west didn't just carry hopes for a new life, they carried cooking knowledge that would forever shape American cuisine. Pioneer Trail Mix meatballs were born out on those dusty trails, where every ingredient had to justify the space it took up in the wagon. These weren't your everyday meatballs. Pioneer women blended ground beef with dried fruits they'd packed for the journey. Raisins, dried apples, even wild berries. The fruit didn't just bring a touch of sweetness. It helped keep the meat moist during the long hours of slow cooking over open fires. To finish them off, they'd roll the meatballs in crushed dried corn, forming a protective coating that helped them last longer. Those heavy cast-iron Dutch ovens weren't just cookware, they were survival gear, buried in hot coals to transform those humble meatballs into meals sturdy enough to fuel days of tough travel. The real secret? They'd save the cooking broth, letting it cool into a jelly that preserved the leftover meatballs for the next leg of the journey. And if you take a closer look at those original trail cooking tools, every dent and mark tells a story of survival and resourcefulness. But as World War II swept through every corner of American life, kitchens took on a new kind of mission with the Victory Kitchen Surprise. This was more than cooking, it was a patriotic act of resourcefulness. Home cooks became battlefield strategists of their own kitchens. Ground beef was stretched with oatmeal instead of breadcrumbs. Bread was far too scarce to waste. And here's where the cleverness really showed, that oatmeal was soaked in tomato juice from backyard Victory Gardens, blending seamlessly into the meat while adding a deep, satisfying flavor. The real triumph came in the substitutions. When onions were hard to come by, dried onion skins saved from earlier meals were soaked and chopped fine to take their place. Garlic might be swapped out for wild ramps foraged from nearby woods. Every adjustment was a small act of victory, turning hardship into something that still tasted like home. Every ingredient came with a backup plan. Some cooks even dried and ground celery leaves to stand in for seasoning when familiar spices ran short. These wartime kitchens had a motto: use it up, wear it out, make it do, or do without. But the truth is, they didn't just get by. They created meals so good that families kept them on the table long after the days of ration books were over. Each Victory Kitchen surprise wasn't just a meal. It was a testament to American resilience, turning moments of scarcity into celebrations of flavor. These forgotten recipes aren't simply about ground beef, they're about the spirit of ingenuity that ran through every church basement, every farmhouse kitchen, and every factory lunchroom. With a few modern updates, these dishes are just as perfect for today's families, offering new ways to build traditions and share meals that carry meaning. And every time we bring one of these recipes back to life, we're preserving a small but powerful piece of history. So, which of these long-lost treasures will find its way back to your family table? If you've enjoyed this trip through America's culinary past, be sure to like and subscribe. And don't forget to share your own family recipes in the comments, because every recipe saved is a story that lives on.